The Haunted Villa by the author of A Modern Bluebeard, Antoinette's Dream, A Cairo Mystery, etc., etc. Published in The Red Dragon, the national magazine of Wales, on the 1st of January 1886. Read by Bethina. I, Leofric Huntingdon, take thee, Anna Euphemia Marsh, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I plight thee my troth. These words are still ringing in my ears, for it was only this day week I uttered them, and as I placed the ring which made us one upon the third finger of my darling's left hand, I would not have changed places with any human being on the face of this earth, however favoured his lot might be. Till death us do part. Yes, there is nothing earthly that can now separate us. I feel supremely happy in my newly acquired sense of possession, and let my glistening eyes rest lovingly on the little head, destitute of hat and covered with soft auburn curls, that nestles softly against my shoulder. "Is my wife very tired?" I whisper presently, as I notice that Effie's eyes are closed and her cheeks looking a little pale. There are only 2 more stations, and then we shall have arrived at our destination. I sincerely trust they have provided us with a good dinner, for I can tell you, little woman, I feel uncommonly peckish. Remember, I have made no regular meal since 8 o'clock this morning." "Oh, you dreadful old gourmand," says Effie, raising a bewitching pair of blue eyes, that long ago had been mine undoing, to my laughing face. "Fancy thinking of your dinner on your wedding tour. Upon my word, sir, I am quite ashamed of you." "And why so, my dear?" I inquire prosaically. "Why should I not enjoy a good dinner on my wedding tour, particularly when I have such a charming little wife to sit at the head of my table and remind me that my uncomfortable bachelor days of hard steaks and tough chops are over for ever?" Effie gives a gleeful little laugh and remarks rather mischievously that she hopes I will always be of the same mind, and not want to join one of those horrid clubs where men always declare that they get their dinners much better served and cooked than in their own homes. Not venturing to bind myself by any distinct promise on this score, I keep a discreet silence, which neither of us breaks for a few minutes. Effie, however, whose tongue seldom remains still much longer than that space of time, rouses herself as the train steams into the station next our own, and declares that she shall be very thankful when we reach Worthing, for so many hours' travelling has made her head ache. "Was it not kind of Cousin Hubert to lend us his villa, Leo?" says my wife. "It is ever so much nicer than going to an hotel, particularly as all his own servants are there, so that I shall be spared the bother of housekeeping while we are on our holiday." The Honourable Hubert St. Clair is the younger son of the late Lord Lovell, and first cousin to my wife. He is a hard, cynical man of the world, and I was never more surprised in my life when he offered us the loan of his bijou residence during our honeymoon. Some years ago I had suspected him of entertaining something more than an ordinary friendship for Effie, but she has assured me with every appearance of sincerity that all his money twice told would never induce her to marry such a sour, dried-up specimen of humanity. And with that assurance I had dismissed the matter from my mind. When she therefore draws my attention to his present act of generosity, I can do no less than acquiesce and declare it is very kind indeed, and that I feel specially grateful to Hubert St. Clair. Effie now begins putting on her black velvet turban, buttoning up her suede gloves and arranging the large number of bandboxes and small parcels every woman seems to consider indispensable to a journey. A few minutes later we are in Worthing Station, where a groom with a Sinclair crest on the gilt buttons of his overcoat touches his hat to us respectfully and informs us that there is a man in attendance to look after our luggage. He will be happy to conduct us straight to the brougham which is waiting outside the station for our reception. Neither Effie nor I happen to be very rich, nor have we been brought up in specially luxurious homes. Consequently, as the two of us step into the well-appointed brougham of Hubert Sinclair, we are inclined to feel more or less puffed up with a sense of our own importance. As for Effie, I feel particularly certain she has not been seated in the brougham 10 minutes before she makes a mental calculation of the number of years that might elapse before I shall be enabled to present her with a similar turnout, and whether the prevailing colour of it shall be chocolate or dark green. "Never mind, little woman," I say fondly, looking down at my wife and taking her pretty gloved hand in mine. "I dare say we shall manage to be very happy without the brougham. At any rate, I will try my best to make you so." "Why, Leo," says my better half, raising her eyes, swimming in tears, for the dear little creature has a most sensitive heart, "however could you have guessed what I was thinking about? I am a bad, ungrateful girl to have allowed such wicked thoughts to enter my mind even for one moment, when I am blessed by being united to the man of my choice, without whom all the broughams in the world would never have made me happy." My readers may picture to themselves the manner in which I repay my wife for her affectionate little speech. The rest of the drive is taken up in planning out our future life, and I fear building for ourselves sundry castles which have no foundations, save in our own airy fancies. For some time we have been leaving Worthing behind us and steadily making for a place called Broadwater, a little distance out of Worthing itself, and noted, I believe, for its Norman edifices, identical with the days of the Crusaders. At last, after passing through several quiet lanes, the sides of which are lined with hawthorn blossoms, we turn up a carriage drive and reach an elegant villa, at the door of which the brougham stops. I help my wife to alight, and we enter the hall together. We are there met by a grandiose dame in a black silk gown and highly starched muslin apron and cap, who informs us that she is the housekeeper and that her name is Mrs. Smith. "My master desired me, ma'am," she says, addressing my wife with marked respect, "to treat you exactly as if you were my own mistress, so I have waited to receive your orders before deciding on any of your private rooms. If you will kindly follow me, ma'am, perhaps you will make your own selection." So saying, she sweeps up the oak staircase, my timid little wife throwing a deprecating glance in my direction and following meekly in her wake. For my own part, I care little whether it is the green room or the yellow room or any other coloured room that we occupy. My present desire is for a good dinner after our long drive, and since my olfactory organ has been agreeably assailed with the delicious smell of cooking ever since I entered the house, I venture to suggest to Effie not to be longer than she can possibly avoid, since I am literally starving. The dinner fully comes up to my expectations, and when my little wife descends in her charmingly fitted grey gown, and with a pretty air of matronly dignity seats herself opposite to me, I feel there is positively nothing left in the world for me to wish for. It is not, however, until the dessert is placed upon the table and we are left to our own devices, that I notice how strangely silent Effie has become, and what a grave look has stolen over her face. "Why, wee wifey," I explain, looking up with a reproachful air, "what on earth is the matter with you? Ever since that stately dame has taken you in hand, you look as completely cowed as if you had seen a ghost." I am little prepared for the effect of my thoughtless speech. As I utter the last sentence, my wife perceptibly starts and looks, if possible, more frightened than ever. "Don't joke about such things, Leo, please," she says in a pleading tone. You are nearer the truth than you imagine, for though I have seen no ghost as yet, let me tell you, this house is haunted. Really, I cannot help it. I burst into a fit of the most uncontrollable laughter. This prosaic-looking, elegantly furnished, comfortable, modern villa haunted? The idea is too ridiculous. I assure you I am only telling you the truth, continues my wife. There is positively a room in this house which is haunted, and by some strange fatality I selected that very room. Here the poor child shudders. Had it not been for that reason, Mrs. Smith would never have disclosed the circumstances. As it is, she justly remarked, it would be very wrong of her to allow me to occupy a haunted chamber in ignorance of the story attached to it, particularly as I am a bride. I don't understand what she means by that, but she laid special stress upon those words, and as dinner was waiting for me, I could not very well stop for further explanations. Now I feel very much annoyed with Mrs. Smith for her conduct. What business has she to go filling my wife's mind with this ridiculous hobgoblin story? I am prepared to speak pretty plainly to Mrs. Smith, and with this object in view I ring the dining-room bell and request the servant who answers the summons to say to the housekeeper that I shall feel obliged if she will find it convenient to wait upon me. In a few moments I hear the rustle of a silk gown, and this is immediately followed by the entrance of Mrs. Smith herself, who graciously asks in what manner she can serve us. Somehow or other, in the presence of so much dignity, all the sharp words I have meditated using vanish from my memory, and it is in quite a mild tone of voice I invite the housekeeper to take a seat, and after pouring her out a glass of wine in which to drink our healths, inquire of her the meaning of her words to my wife before dinner. Here's to your very good health, ma'am, and to yours also, sir, and may you both live to enjoy many years of wedded happiness together, says the housekeeper as she puts down the empty glass with a sigh. You ask me, sir, she continues, turning once more to me, the meaning of the words I used to your good lady just now. I told her that one of the rooms in this house was haunted. And good reason enough I have for knowing it. Is there not somebody who has said that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy? That's true enough, as I can testify after the strange things I've seen and heard in this house during the 35 years I've lived in it. Happening to look up at this moment, I notice that my wife's face has turned the colour of the tablecloth. I have always held that mysterious illusions, no matter of what nature, are more difficult to combat and explain away than any plain and varnished tale. I therefore desire the housekeeper to relate to us as faithfully as she can the whole story, from beginning to end. She signifies her willingness to comply, commences as follows. When I first came to live at Worthing, sir, I was barely 15 years of age. My aunt was at that time housekeeper here, and as she was on the lookout for a good, strong, tidy girl to assist her in the housework, my mother thought it would be an excellent opportunity for me to enter service, and so begged her to give me a trial instead of taking a stranger. The Hawthorns was then owned by Lord Lovell, the present Mr. Sinclair's father, but he seldom honoured it with his presence, so that the only servants necessary to keep the place in order were my aunt, myself, and a man with a boy under him who attended to the grounds and greenhouses and did odd jobs about the house. I had been with my aunt about 2 or 3 years when one day a letter arrived, the contents of which caused us all the greatest surprise. It was to inform us that Lord Lovell had married again, this time a young and beautiful girl scarcely out of her teens. My aunt was requested to engage fresh servants and prepare the Hawthorns for the reception of the bride, whom his lordship proposed bringing thither to spend her honeymoon. All was done as he desired, an efficient staff of servants engaged, and the whole house renovated and refurnished from top to bottom. The room I liked most of all was called my lady's boudoir. It is always kept locked now, and no one is permitted to enter it. This room was situated at the end of the principal corridor and had windows opening onto a wide balcony filled with the rarest and choicest of plants. It was exquisitely furnished, the walls being lined with beautiful paintings, whilst the pale blue hangings, soft Persian rugs, and lavish display of delicate china and bric-a-brac transformed an ordinary room into a veritable fairy bower. I was never tired of admiring all the beautiful things heaped together there, and my aunt declared the master must have gone daft over his young wife, or he would never have spent such oceans of money on a house he scarcely visited 2 months in the year. There was a portrait of him hanging in the drawing-room. It hangs there still, just over the mantelpiece, in which he is represented as a tall, dark man, nigh 50 years of age, with a stern, proud look in his face and piercing eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you moved. In appearance, not a man likely to go daft over any woman. Well, at last the wedding day arrived. It was the 4th of October. For more reasons than one, I shall never forget that day if I live to be 100. The country was visited and devastated by one of the most terrible storms ever experienced within the memory of the oldest inhabitant. The wind and the rain, the thunder and lightning seemed to be each striving for mastery, the whole dreadful combination making one feel as if pandemonium itself was let loose upon the earth. The maids whispered that it was an evil omen, and although my aunt rebuked them for their superstitious fears, she admitted to me that she would not stand in the bride's shoes on such a day for untold gold. Unfortunately, matters were not yet at their worst, for about 3 o'clock a messenger arrived post-haste from the manor house, where the Dowager Lady Lovell lived, with tidings that she had been seized with an attack of apoplexy, and if her son wished to see her alive again, he must leave his young bride and repair to his mother's sick-bed without further delay. The message was from the Dowager's family physician, but as Lord Lovell and his young bride were expected in the course of another hour, there was nothing to do but to await their arrival before delivering it. "What a homecoming for her poor lamb," sighed my aunt. "I've been told that both my lord's sons and the Dowager Lady Lovell refused to be present at the marriage, so that she will stand quite alone on this day of all days, when a young creature most needs support and comfort. Well, thank goodness amongst poor folks we have none of these silly jealousies. If money is to breed so much ill blood between relations, it's a lucky thing for some of us we have none of it." At 4 o'clock punctually, all the servants were gathered together in the hall, with my aunt at the head of them. Shortly afterwards the sound of carriage wheels was heard, and the footman hastened to open wide the front door. There stood Lord Lovell, with his young wife on his arm. He was a fine-looking man for his age, and upright as a dart. As he stood there with bared head, looking down on his young bride, with such a proud look of ownership in his shining eyes, and such perfect reverent love in every gesture as he introduced her to me, we one and all felt that he would lavish in all its entirety on the young girl, by his side, the affection he had denied the former Lady Lovell, whom he had married solely and wholly with a view of pleasing his family. As for her, how can I describe her to you? To my young eyes she resembled an angel more than a human being. She was very pale and fragile-looking, and her hair, of which she seemed to have an abundant quantity, was just the colour of dead gold. What struck me most of all, however, was her voice. It was, without exception, the softest, sweetest, most musical voice I had ever listened to. There was only one thing lacking about her, and that was the look of pure happiness, of perfect content, that beams from the face of every young bride who has made a marriage after her own heart. A marriage in which neither money nor position nor any other worldly consideration has been weighed in the balance against mutual love. That, alas, was altogether wanting. She was gentleness and sweetness itself in her manner to the master. But in place of the love which is every husband's right, there was a look of patient suffering on her pale young face that made my heart positively ache for her. She had a kind word to say to each of us, but when my turn came, and she held out a beautiful hand glistening with diamond rings, Some irresistible impulse caused me to raise it to my lips. My aunt was shocked and indignant at the liberty I had taken, but her ladyship only smiled and stroked my hair softly, promised that I should always be her own little maid, if I liked, to wait upon her always. Then my aunt came forward, and after expressing her sorrow for the evil tidings she was the means of communicating, repeated to his lordship the message she had received from the manor house. Lord Lovell listened to it frowningly, and then gazed with longing eyes on the young bride he was bound to separate from on his wedding day. Of course, there was but one course to pursue. The carriage was still waiting at the door, so after an affectionate parting from the woman he loved better than his life, and placing her under the motherly protection of my aunt until his return, which he hoped would be a speedy one, he was borne away to the manor house, where the Dowager Lady Lovell lay sick unto death. Had he been only able to foresee how he should meet his beautiful young bride again, I do not think he would have left her thus in our midst, even for the sake of his mother, and a man can have but one mother in this world. From the moment that Lord Lovell listened to the message delivered by my aunt to the moment that the carriage drove away with him, all was done so rapidly and confusedly that no one had time to notice the strange effect her husband's departure had upon Lady Lovell. The most peculiar look passed over her face, and I fancied I heard her mutter the words, "It is fate! It is fate! I cannot battle against my fate." There was some mystery here which I could not solve at the time, but which, alas, I understood too well before the night was over. Well, everything was done for her ladyship's comfort that could be done in the absence of her husband. The dinner that had been prepared for the bridal pair was served to her in solitary state, and then she was left to feast her eyes upon the many beautiful things surrounding her in the charming boudoir of which I have already spoken. It was from thence that an order shortly came desiring me to join her. "She seems to have taken quite a fancy to the child," said my aunt. I was a big strapping girl of near 18 years of age, but still a child in my aunt's eyes. "Well, try to be a bit of a comfort to her, my dear, but be sure to mind your manners." When I entered the boudoir, I found her ladyship seated in a low easy-chair with her face buried between her hands. She looked up at me wistfully and then desired me to place myself on a footstool at her feet. "Nancy," she said softly, "your name is Nancy, is it not? I have asked you here to beg a favour of you. I think you like me, child, and I want to make a friend of you. For let me tell you, Nancy, that though you see me clothed in this beautiful gown and in the midst of all this luxury," here she pointed in a contemptuous manner to the many lovely things I had so envied and admired, "there is not a creature on God's earth who needs a friend more than I do this night." With all the enthusiasms of youth, I pressed her hand and declared I would go to the world's end to do her bidding. "How old are you, Nancy?" she inquired. 18, I replied. 18 next birthday." Her gentle eyes filled with tears. "Ah, God," she cried, just my age when I—" Then she broke off and asked me if I had ever loved anyone. I blushed scarlet, for at the time my future husband, who was then the new under-gardener, had already managed to win my young heart. "Ah, I see how it is," she said, smiling and sighing softly. "Poor child, you have already tasted what is woman's greatest blessing or greatest curse. I was just your age, Nancy, when I also loved someone dearly, but he was poor, and I was poor, and in our rank of life it is a crime for two people who are poor to love each other. Be thankful, child, that you have no scheming mother or worldly father to prevent you from putting your hand into that of the man of your choice and hallowing your love at God's altar. As for me, I committed a sacrilege. I listened to the reasoning of the world. The world told me that poor people are always looked down upon and despised, that when poverty came to me, and possibly to my children, my love would take itself wings and fly out of the window, that if I really wished for happiness, I must ally myself to wealth and position, wear beautiful gowns and deck myself out in gorgeous jewels. It was the devil's teaching, Nancy, but alas, like so many others, I turned a willing ear to the devil, and we parted, I and the man I loved, never to meet again on this earth until tonight. Tonight? I echoed in amazement. Tonight, in Lord Lovell's absence? Yes, tonight, Nancy. At least so he says, and he never lied to me. We meet, but not in the way you anticipate. For he is dead. Dead? I exclaimed, my astonishment breaking through all bounds. If he is dead, how can he come and see you? Ah, that is what I do not know, she said gently. They say the spirits of the dead are allowed sometimes to revisit the earth. If that is so, Walter's spirit will visit me tonight. She spoke quite seriously, without betraying the least fear. Presently putting her hand in her pocket, she drew forth a letter, which she covered with kisses, and then desired me to read. They are the last words he ever wrote to me, Nancy, said her ladyship, and if they contained nothing but curses, I should still treasure them. Such wonderful love made me dumb. I took the letter mechanically from her hand and commenced reading it. That letter is still in my possession, sir, and I have conned over it so often in the course of years that have elapsed since that wonderful night that I can repeat it to you word for word. It was as follows. My own loved one, for despite everything that has passed, Margaret, you are that still. We cannot give our very soul away out of our possession and still retain it in our bosom. You have my love as I have yours. I have never doubted that, though you are giving your earthly body and your beauty to the man they call Lord Lovell. Ah, how I have yearned for a sight of you, Margaret, how I have longed for a touch of your soft lips on mine. The hunger of my soul is killing me. I am dying. And yet heaven itself will not be heaven to me without you. The doctors tell me I have not many more hours to live. They will be lowering me into my last resting place, Margaret, as your bridal train wends its way to church. Ah, sweet love, think of me, but not as in my grave, for as there is a heaven above us, I will see you again on your wedding night. Until then, I am what I always have been and always shall be, yours eternally, in life and in death. Walter. The tears were in my eyes as I gave her ladyship back the letter. Ah, how he must have loved her, this dead and gone Walter. Still, he was dead and gone, and I felt that her duty was now to the living, to her husband. I even ventured to say as much. She never answered me, scarce heeded the words I uttered, but just sat with that faraway look on her face, as if she was communing with someone in the land of spirits. Presently she drew a deep breath and resumed the conversation. You will stay with me tonight, Nancy, she said. You will not be afraid to meet my darling. I promised to do exactly as she wished, for I felt that her mind was more or less unhinged by her sufferings. Poor young thing! They had been severe enough to prostrate a rougher nature than hers. As the night came on, I had the greatest difficulty in soothing her. She walked restlessly up and down the floor of her bedchamber, and it was not until I had exhausted all my powers of persuasion that I induced her to undress and retire to bed. As for me, I flung myself beside her just as I was, without removing my clothes, and fell, I suppose, into a sound sleep from sheer fatigue. It must have been between 12 and 1 o'clock when Lady Lovell roused me. "Hush, Nancy," she said, clutching my shoulder with her left hand. "Do you not hear him? He is coming up the stairs, my darling, my own one. Soon he will be here in another moment." It was true, someone was coming up the stairs. I could hear each footfall as distinctly as possible. But of course it was not a ghost, a spirit. That was only her ladyship's distraught fancy. Perhaps my aunt had been taken suddenly ill in the night and needed help. All these thoughts passed rapidly through my mind when I got up to open the door. As there is a living God above us, something passed me with a rushing sound and entered the room. Something not of this earth, as I felt instinctively at the moment. Before I had time to collect my senses, I heard a stifled shriek from her ladyship's lips, and the words, "Forgive me, Walter. It was not my fault, indeed, it was not my fault." And then all was still. The fearful stillness after the excitement I had gone through numbed my brain, and it was some minutes before I could find the matches and light the gas. Then I turned my frightened glance upon the bed, but there was nothing to frighten me there. Her ladyship lay like a little child asleep, with her head pillowed on her bare round arm, and the loveliest smile upon her lips, a smile of such radiancy and peace as I have never beheld upon human lips since. It was not until I'd called my aunt and the other servants round me that I knew she was dead, that she had given up her sweet young life in that terrible moment when the spirit of her true love claimed her for his own. For a moment there is dead silence after the housekeeper ceases. Then Effie says in a suspiciously quivering voice, "So you never saw the ghost, Mrs. Smith?" "No, ma'am, I never saw the ghost from that day to this," answers the housekeeper, "though I cannot deny that strange sounds are often to be heard in the house after midnight. Many a time when I have been lying awake at night, I have listened to footsteps ascending the stairs, the same footsteps I listened to just 17 years ago, but I know what they mean and I take no notice. The ghost or ghosts will never hurt us. The maids declare too that if you pass her ladyship's bedroom between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, you will hear the same wild shriek, followed by the piteous words she uttered as she drew her last breath. Whether they are right or whether they are wrong, I felt it my bounden duty, sir, to make your young wife acquainted with the facts of the case, for fear the curse of that blighted marriage should alight on her innocent head." "For my own part," I remarked thoughtfully, for despite myself the housekeeper's story has had its effect on me, "I am surprised that your master, being, as he doubtless is, aware of the terrible tragedy enacted within these four walls, should choose it as a residence for a young couple during their wedding tour." "It does seem strange, sir," says the housekeeper, "though of course it is not my place to find fault with my master." "I think I can solve the mystery, Leo." My young wife is glancing timidly at me and blushing faintly. "Before I met you, Cousin Hubert did me the honour to propose that I should become his wife. I refused him as gently as I possibly could. Whether he thought that his wishes were likely those of royalty, intended to be looked upon in the light of commands, I cannot say. I only know he exhibited a most unjustifiable anger at my decision and threatened to be revenged upon me for that slight I had offered him. I naturally put down such a threat to idle temper. None of the Lovels could ever brook the least opposition, but I see now that he really meant every word he said. "Fortunately for us, dearest," I say, crossing over to Effie's side so that I may throw a protecting arm round her waist, "and owing to Mrs. Smith's commendable candour, we are enabled to frustrate his amiable designs. Ghost or no ghost, my wife shall not remain another hour in the house of any gentleman who has insulted her. Put on your hat at once, my dear, and after you have thanked Mrs. Smith for her kindness to us, we shall find some sort of conveyance to take us back to Parsons' Hotel. So fate wills it, after all, that we do not inhabit the haunted villa, or put to the test the truths of the housekeeper's story. When, however, my wife is in a particularly mischievous mood, she delights to tease me by asserting that I ran away most ignominiously from poor Lady Lovell's ghost." That was The Haunted Villa. I don't know who wrote this story. It tells us it's by the author of A Modern Bluebeard, Antoinette's Dream, A Cairo Mystery, etc., etc. It doesn't name the author of those or this story. How very strange. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to click the like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel, or indeed joining the channel. For a very small amount every month you can support my work. And whether you join, subscribe or click the like button, thank you for listening.